everyone, I'm Carly and welcome to Belle's Books. Hope you're all having a lovely bank holiday weekend. I've been baking a cake today because I'm doing a charity cake stall tomorrow as part of the May Day celebrations in the town where I live. And apart from that, finishing a book. So I'm going to talk you through today all the books that I've read in the first quarter of the year. According to my Goodreads, that's 15 books. Some of them I don't have because I've taken them back to the library or I've given them to other people, but I'm going to talk you through them. So the first one on my list I don't have because it was a library book and I took it back, was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. That was for my book group. Bloody brilliant. I loved it. It was so good. I didn't think I would like it as much. I read the novel. Apparently it's a book with illustrations in it, and it's better if you read the one with the illustrations. They are amazing. I did check it out afterwards, but I just read the novel and I thought it was fantastic. Blew me away. So it's about this little lad. His name is Connor, and he is dealing with some difficult stuff. His mum has cancer, and a nightmare that he has that kind of, you don't know whether it's a dream or it's really happening, where this yew tree comes down the hill and knocks on his window and tells him he's going to tell him stories. I think it's 3 stories, and then the 4th one Connor has to tell him story, but it has to be the truth. Narrative is Connor dealing with his mum being really ill and not having many friends at school, and then this tree rocking up and telling him stories at night, and the stories are all like, they all have a moral where it looks like it's going one way and then it turns out to be something completely different. It's just a brilliant book. I loved it. I loved the way that the narrative went interspersed between Connor's story and the tree's stories, and it made me cry at the end. Apparently it's a film, which I haven't seen yet because I was too emotional and I couldn't deal with it, so it's on my list to watch, but I just couldn't go through with it at the time. So if you have watched the film, let me know, and let me know how you think it compares to the book. I loved it, gave it 5 stars, and we had a very emotional book group in January when we talked about that. So that was the first one. I also read, this was carried over from last year, The Unmapped Country by Anne Quinn. This is a collection of short stories, fragments and unfinished work by Anne Quinn. She is an experimental writer. She died in 1973 at the age of 37. She swam out to sea in Brighton. Very sad, very tragic, and she was an amazing writer. I'm looking at her work for my PhD. If you're into experimental writing, then check it out because it is amazing. So she's been likened to people like Kathy Acker, Virginia Woolf, Emma McBride, Annakina Schofield, those kind of people. She's very underrated and not well known, but there is, I think Jennifer Hodgson, who wrote the introduction to this book, is writing a critical work on her at the moment, so I'm excited about that coming out because I'm going to use it for my research. So if you like experimental writing, do check it out. Some of it is a bit bonkers, but I think it's just fantastic. I love it. There are some stories which she completed, but I don't know if they were ever published. Some of them were published. There are all kinds of stuff going on in here. So, and a lot of the things that she writes about is like lots of everydayness and awkwardness and interaction between people, and there's themes of like belonging and identity. It's just fantastic. I loved it. So if you're up for pushing the boundaries, check out The Unmapped Country. Definitely worth a read. Next up, I read Jen Campbell's short story collection, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. These are stories which are kind of based in fairy tale and folklore. She has a lot of themes going on here about identity and bodies, particularly with like disfigurement or the way that we perceive different bodies. One of my favourite stories in here is called Plum Pie, Zombie Green, Yellow Bee, Purple Monster. And it's about these children who you slowly discover are part children, part flower. And they're taken to this camp every summer and they have experiments done on them, and it's quite sinister. A lot of these stories in here kind of make you feel uncomfortable, but I like that. I like that in a story. Jen does an amazing analysis of this story. She takes you through it, and so I marked my copy up with lots of notes. You can see that there. Talking about how she wrote it and everything that went into it and all of her references that you might not immediately get when you read it. I'll link it down below. There's some really great stories in here. I love this collection. And another one that I found really good was Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel, about this girl and her aunt who run a hotel where people can come and kind of sleep in a coffin and experience death, and it's very spooky and just a great set of stories. I would highly recommend it. Next up, I read a little essay by Olivia Sujic. I don't know if that's how you say it, I hope so. Called Exposure. Olivia is a novelist, and she wrote a book called Sympathy, which is about surveillance identity in the internet age. I haven't read that, but I do want to. So this little essay is about how women writers are kind of scrutinised for the way that we use our personal experience within our writing, where male authors aren't, and how that can lead to self-doubt and anxiety. So she's talking about her own anxiety after her book was published, and she went on a residential trip to Brussels to work on her new project, and how that anxiety affected her. And she's talking about other writers that use their own experience in their writing. So people like Rachel Cusk and Maggie Nelson, just the place of personal testimony and the way that it's viewed as not objective, and it's kind of dismissed because it's written by women. So this was a great little essay. It's only a little book and it's 120 odd pages, so I definitely check this out. Next, I read Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. This is a very short book, and it's a kind of a mixture of, well, it's not, yeah, it's poetry, but it's kind of, I'd say it's just poetic prose. It's beautiful. It's beautifully written. It's very different. Again, this is slightly experimental. It's about this man and his two sons who are recovering from the loss of their wife and mother, and it's about grief. It's also riffing on Ted Hughes's Crow, which I haven't read, but I do want to now. You don't have to have read Ted Hughes's Crow to understand this, obviously, because I hadn't read it. And it's how they're dealing with grief, and this crow shows up at their house and basically just kind of causes havoc with them and acts like a right dick. So I think the crow is the kind of the embodiment of grief, just wrecking things all over the place, but he's supposedly there to help. There's some really sad kind of instances in this text when the crow does just really odd things, like he says to the boys, both of you draw me a picture of your mother, and whoever does the best one can have her back. And so they set about making their pictures of their mum, and of course the crow is like at the end, well, of course you're not going to have her back, and it just breaks your heart. This made me cry on a train when I was finished reading this. I was like, "Bah," at the end. But it's a beautiful meditation on grief and how it makes you feel. So I would definitely recommend picking this up if you're at a point where you are not right in it. It definitely helps, because I was at a place where I needed some, what did I need? I needed something to help me with grief that I was going through at the time, and I wanted something that could relate, and this was it. So I would definitely recommend this if it's not too raw a stage for you. Next up, I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and it's, oh, where's the translator? Bear with, I need the translator. Translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. Bloody love this one. This is about Kiko, who is a Japanese woman. I think she's in her 30s, and she works in a convenience store, and it's about her life. And she is very happy because she's got structure and order in her life, and it's about the expectations of society and the pressures put on women of a certain age to get married, have children, get a good job. And Kiko she can't fathom this because she's happy. She doesn't want those things, but society expects it of her. And it's looking at the way her family respond to her, the way her friends respond to her when she just carries on with her life being a convenience store worker. She does have autism, that comes across really well, but you're on her side and you feel for her because you're just like, yes, why is there all this pressure? If she's happy, leave her alone. And it's just beautifully written. It's from her perspective, so it's in the first person, and I just love this book. I thought it was fantastic. It's a punchy little novel, so do go and check this out, particularly if you want to read more translated fiction like I do this year. Next up, I read Everything Under by Daisy Johnson. So it's a modern retelling of the Oedipus story, and it's about this woman who is reflecting back on her life with her estranged mother, and she goes on a hunt to find her mother because she hasn't seen her in years. When she was a child, she lived on a riverboat with her mother, and they were very insular and had their own language and their own way of living. They were quite wild, and she's looking back and remembering things. It's her story and her looking for her mother, and also there's this intertwining narrative of this other person that comes to their boat, Marcus, on winter. I think he stays with them, and yeah, it's just looking at his story as well, but also there's a lot of kind of creepy, uncanny, a little bit mythical of a theme running through here. There's some spooky goings on with a creature that is moving about in the river and stealing things and just being generally very scary. So yeah, it's quite a creepy read, but I loved it. I thought it was brilliant, and yeah, the ending just kind of blew me away. So definitely check that out. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodread. Yay! Okay, I had some audiobooks on my list as well. Yeah, so I listened to 3 books on audiobook. My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyin Kim Braithwaite. That was amazing. I love that. It's only a little book. So it's told from the perspective of Korede. She is the big sister, and it's about her younger sister, Ayula, who is beautiful and all the men want her, and she keeps accidentally killing her boyfriends, and Korede is the one that she calls to clean up all the mess when she does. So it's about their relationship, and it is darkly comic. It is really funny, but kind of in a very dark... Oh, hello, Katie. Katie has just come in. Oh, Katie! She wants to say hello. Come on. Come on, let's talk about this book. Oh! Say hello. Hello. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So, Korede has to clear up the mess that her sister makes after she kills her boyfriend. And you do find out... Oh, go on then, bye. You do find out kind of a little bit of background and why this is happening. So there's like a almost flashback series throughout the narrative about what happened to them when they were younger. But it gets really interesting because Ayula comes to where Korede works in the hospital, and she starts going out with the dude that Korede really wants to go out with. And you're like, oh, come on, give her a break. And so Korede is really worried that she's gonna knock this dude off. Fantastic book. I bloody loved it. Gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. And it's on the Women's Prize shortlist, which I'm not surprised about. But that is the only one I've read, so I'm going to reserve judgment on whether I want it to win or not. So I don't know yet. Next up, I listened to Normal People by Sally Rooney on audiobook. This is the story of Connell and Marianne. And it's about their relationship from when they were at school, going up through university. And it's very much about the awkwardness between two people when things are unsaid or things are misunderstood. So you follow them through a lot of years as they're growing up. They move apart, they go to I think they go to the same university, but they kind of travel around a little bit and spend time apart, and they have different boyfriends and girlfriends, and the whole time you're just like, oh, what, you should be together. But it's a really great novel because you as the reader can see all the things that they're not saying to each other, and you just want to like smash their heads together and go, for God's sake, guys. but it's such a good exploration of the way that happens in relationships, where you might not say something and then something is misunderstood, and that relationship will go off on a whole different trajectory because of that one instance. So yeah, I love that. Surprised it wasn't in the shortlist as well. Next up, I listened to Bryony and Roses by T. Kingfisher on audiobook, which was a recommendation from Jean at Bookish Thoughts. Now, I didn't really read much fantasy, but this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It was actually quite funny and a little bit cheesy, but I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. So it's classic. The Beauty character, her name's Bryony, comes to the castle, and the thing I loved about this was that she's a gardener. I'm a big gardener. I've got an allotment. I love my garden. I love Gardener's World. Monty Don's like my idol. And she's a gardener, and she so loves her garden that when she has to go and move to the castle with the beast, she takes all of her plants with her. I'm like, I can totally get on board with that. I know where you're coming from, Bryony. It was brilliant, and the beast is like into making all these like little intricate mechanisms, like little creatures that like bees that fly around, and they're all clockwork because he's been there for bloody ages being a beast. And yeah, so they kind of fall in love, and it's lovely. And there's a sinister side to the house. There's something creepy going on, so it's like a mystery at the same time. Jean talks about this, so I'll find the video that she talks about it and I'll link it below. She does a better job than I do. Yeah, it's building up to this crescendo of something's going to happen. She's trying to work out what is going on. And it's a really dramatic ending, and it was fantastic. I love that. So definitely will be reading some more fantasy in the future. On the same vein, then I read Ash by Melinda Lowe, which is a Cinderella retelling with a queer love story. And it's got fairies in, so tick, tick, tick. All of the boxes. Oh, I loved it. It was really good. All of these books I loved. I didn't have any duds, really. But this one was fantastic because I love Cinderella. I love anything to do with fairies. And it was nice that it's a queer love story. So the love interest is like the king's huntswoman, who's like a badass babe. So that was really nice and refreshing. So I would highly recommend that one. Next, I read Spring by Ali Smith. I might do a separate video just on this, so I won't talk too much about it. Needless to say, I love Ali Smith. The woman can do no wrong in my eyes. So I gave it 5 stars because it's bloody brilliant. She's writing, this is the third in her seasonal quartet. It started with autumn in 2016 after the EU referendum. Then we had winter in 2017. This is set now, spring 2019. Each book has a standalone storyline with characters that do not interact throughout the book. So you can read them all as standalone books. In this book, the main character starts off as Richard Leese, who is a aging TV director, and he's mourning the loss of his friend Paddy, who died recently. So he's grieving and looking back on his career and his time with Paddy, and he's a bit lost. Then it completely changes tack and goes on a different tangent. So the other character is Brittany, who works basically like a glorified security guard in an immigration centre where people are detained. It's an exploration into the way that we treat immigrants, the way that they're detained in horrific conditions when they shouldn't be, and yeah, so it's very contemporary. It's looking at the current state of the country, the way that people are very suspicious and resentful of people like refugees when they shouldn't be, and immigrants, and she does it very well through this narrative of Brittany. This is a book with a lot going on in here. There's loads of themes to unpack. I've only read it once. I'm going to be reading it again a few times because I'm looking at this for my research. So yeah, I might do a separate video on this because there's a lot going on in here. But as with Ali Smith, nothing is straightforward. There's no linear time frame in this. It skips about between different time periods. And she's talking about spring as the season of potential and rebirth and growth. But obviously here in Britain we're having a bit of a difficult time with it. What with the nonsense that is Brexit and the fallout from the referendum where everyone's just being a massive dick. So yeah, she's talking about the current political state, the current social state, and she does give you kind of like a message of hope. So if you haven't read it yet, please do pick it up because it's bloody brilliant. Okay, next up I read Diving Bells. I've done a review video of that, so I'm not going to talk about it here. I'll link my review in the description box down below, so check it out. It's a short story collection set in Cornwall around fairies, folklore, and all things a bit uncanny. And lastly, the book I finished today was English Animals by Laura Kay. This is the story of Mirka, who is a Slovakian woman who comes to England to live and work because her family have rejected her because she had an affair with her English teacher, who also happened to be a woman. So she comes to this house to work for a couple called Richard and Sophie. So it's a big manor house in the countryside, and she thinks she's going to be an au pair, and then she gets there and realises there's no kids here, what am I doing? And they run a bizarre taxidermy business, and she finds out that she's being brought in to help Richard with taxidermy, which is gross. There's some really gross bits in this book, so yeah, if you can get over that, definitely read it because it's an amazing story. I loved it. So Mirka falls in love with and has an affair with Sophie. So there's a queer story at the heart of this book, which is fantastic. And Mirka is really worried, like, oh god, what if Richard finds out? She's really worried that she's like, she knows what she's doing is wrong because Sophie is married. But Sophie's the one that's being a dick. It gets very dramatic at the end. There's a lot going on in here. Larger themes, obviously, to do with belonging, and again, the way we see immigrants and people from other countries, the assumptions we have about them. This is a great book. I love this. Would definitely recommend this. Got this out from the library, so I'm going to be popping it back soon. So go in and pick it up. They are all the books that I have read in the first quarter of the year. Let me know what you're reading. I would like to know, please. I'm currently reading Circe for my book club, so I'll talk about that when I do my next wrap up. In the meantime, tell me what you're reading. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Talk to me in the comments below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!